Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So today I want to talk about what it says in the title there, the excuses that have been made for Nina Turner losing her recent congressional race to uh, establishment corporate Democrat Shontel Brown. Turner, of course, being the uh, firebrand Justice Democrat who is very well known for her prominent role in Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns in 2016 and 2020. And so she recently ran for Congress in Ohio's 11th congressional district, encompassing Cleveland and Akron, uh, and lost a close race by about 6 percentage points to Shontel Brown. And she had started the race with quite a big lead on the rest of the field, and slowly over time that dwindled. And so, well, let me just uh, show you uh, clips of some of the reasons that have been given for why she lost, and then we'll talk about why I don't think uh, that's really the main reason. So here's Nina Turner supporter Krystal talking about the race. Oops, let me switch the feed here. Um, and she also quotes briefly from Nina Turner's concession speech, where Turner talks about why she thinks that she lost.
On the other hand, an organized coalition of money and power was able to defeat one of the best among us. Nina Turner went down to defeat in an Ohio special election. Worse yet, Nina lost to a candidate mired in a corruption scandal and buoyed by money and support from some of the worst people on the entire planet. So as far as the campaign autopsy goes, what happened to Nina? It's really not all that complicated, guys. Millions of dollars in outside money were dropped on her head in the final weeks of this campaign. Jordan Chariton, he was there on the ground. He said it wasn't just the negative ads, but the billboards that were everywhere in the district reminding voters of Nina's rather brutally honest assessment that voting for Joe Biden was like eating half a bowl of shit. In typical truth-telling fashion, Nina herself laid out what she thought happened in the campaign in her concession speech.
See, we didn't lose this race. Evil money manipulated and maligned in this election.
So plenty of the
Okay, so as you can see there, Nina Turner, as well as many of her supporters, blamed Turner's loss on the influx of so-called evil money, money from political action committees and individuals loyal to the Democratic establishment, quite a few Republican big money contributions as well, and a really hefty sum from a pro-Israel political action committee. Now, I don't want to say that that didn't play a role. Obviously, it was all that money coming into the campaign that or into her campaign that enabled Shontel Brown to catch and ultimately beat Nina Turner. And also, we really can't say what happened with the counting of the votes in that race. It's done in that district, as well as many parts of the country, on electronic voting machines with proprietary software, where we're not able to check whether the votes were tabulated properly. But I mean, we really don't know. So that aside, let's talk about what went wrong for Nina Turner's campaign, and why the excuse made that it was big money that caused her defeat doesn't really hold up, and why we need to be willing to be critical of Nina Turner and other progressive Democrats in an honest, forthright way, rather than making excuses for them. So, regarding the money in the race, it might surprise you to learn if you've heard what Nina Turner said and what people like Krystal and Jordan Chariton of the Status Quo podcast are saying, that Nina Turner actually outraised Shontel Brown by more than double, $4.5 million to $2.1 million. So just the sheer amount of money is not the reason why Nina Turner lost. Compare her race with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's first run for Congress in 2018, where AOC only raised a fifth of the money of her establishment Democrat opponent, and yet was able to win through a strong progressive message and a very well organized door-to-door canvassing campaign. Now, just to be clear, I'm not glad that Nina Turner lost. I'd prefer that she won. She would have undoubtedly had a better voting record in Congress than Shontel Brown is going to have, and she would have, talked a good game in some respects, said some of the right things about this or that issue. But ultimately, like other members of the squad or other progressive Democrats in Congress, such as Bernie Sanders, I think that ultimately she would have backed down from fights with the Democratic establishment, just like the others have on many occasions, which is something I've discussed extensively in previous episodes of the show, particularly in episode 52, where I talked about some people on the left calling AOC and her colleagues the fraud squad. So, in this video, what I'm going to do is make a case not only for taking a broader look at why Nina Turner lost, but also that general point of view about the limitations of trying to affect change within the Democratic Party, and of politicians like Nina Turner or Bernie Sanders or AOC who are doing so. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you from Nina Turner's supporters is this thread from Jordan Chariton on why he thinks Nina Turner lost, which echoes some of the things that Nina Turner and Krystal said. So he starts out saying, unlike the phony leftist tweeters celebrating Turner's loss, I was on the ground in Cleveland and Akron and spoke with campaign folks and witnessed with my own eyes. She didn't lose because she ran as a Democrat. Would have lost by 50 if she ran as a Green Party. I'm not aware of anyone saying that. She didn't lose because she tried to court conservative Democrats instead of running scorched earth against Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. That's an assertion, not backed by any evidence. She did try to court the support of conservative Democrats, actually got support from some of them. And, as we'll talk about, she didn't particularly criticize Joe Biden or the Democratic Party establishment during her campaign. Okay, so he goes on and with some other things he doesn't think were a factor. She's lost for multiple reasons, he says. Although Nina Turner raised a ton of money, well, okay, Jordan, Nina did raise a ton of money, so money is not an excuse. In the final weeks before the election, Democratic Party super PACs flooded TV here with ads smearing Turner. Not only TV ads, but I couldn't drive around Cleveland, he says, without seeing large billboards quoting Nina's comment to the effect that voting for Joe Biden was like eating half a bowl of shit as opposed to the full bowl of shit that was Donald Trump. So, I'm not saying those negative ads weren't a factor or the big contributions from establishment Democrats, but there are ways to combat that sort of thing, and as Jordan does concede here, she didn't do some of them. Nina's Turner campaign didn't go negative against Brown until a few weeks before the election. By the time they did, the millions worth of negative ads against her had already been on TV for a while. I'm not sure how much money it was, but I don't think it was as much money as Jordan's implying here. But in any case, I just want to come back to what Jordan says up here at the top about so-called phony leftist tweeters celebrating Turner's loss. Again, I'm not celebrating Nina Turner's loss. I don't know anybody who is. I just think, we have to take a critical look at the Democratic Party as a vehicle for change. Despite perhaps having good intentions, people who run as Democrats are not going to be major vehicles for change. And as I'll discuss further, they themselves have a lot of political limitations, partly because they have chosen to keep themselves within the confines of the Democratic Party. As I said in describing this channel on the About page, to achieve the world we want, we must face the truth about the world we have. A truth that the mainstream media often hides from us. And my channel takes a look at those hidden truths. It's often said that without justice, there will be no peace. But it's also the case that without truth, there can't be justice. And to that we can add telling the truth about political issues and personalities is never a bad thing. Criticisms of Nina Turner or other progressive Democrats from those of us to the left of Democrats are not smears, nor are they counterproductive to efforts to organize for social change. They're necessary. They should be welcomed. It's important to understand the political limitations of people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, Nina Turner, Ilhan Omar, and so forth. And also to understand what a political dead end it is to try to change society by trying to change the Democratic Party. That's just doomed to fail. As Jill Stein once said, you can't have a revolution in a counter-revolutionary party. And to that we could add, you won't find revolutionaries in a counter-revolutionary party either. Now, it's true that once in a blue moon, you do find people in the Democratic Party who are pretty far to the left, farther to the left than people like AOC or Bernie Sanders. But, they get driven out. You take the case of Henry Wallace, Franklin Roosevelt's vice president during his first 3 terms as president. Wallace was an unabashed socialist, not someone who labels themselves a quote-unquote democratic socialist like Bernie Sanders, who really is more sort of a Rooseveltian liberal. But, Wallace was a real socialist. And he was FDR's vice president for 3 terms as president, back when they would let people run for or be president more than 2 terms. But in 1944, the Democratic Party establishment refused to let Roosevelt pick him for his 4th presidential run and forced him to pick right-wing Democrat Harry Truman. And pretty soon after that, Henry Wallace left the Democratic Party, and in 1948 he ran for president, again as an open socialist, as the candidate with the Progressive Party, in 1948. Another example, Cynthia McKinney, who was a Democratic congresswoman from Georgia in the 90s and parts of the early 2000s, had the most leftist foreign policy of any member of Congress, and in general, very progressive. Really, the strongest progressive in Congress of any person that comes to mind within the last few decades. She was one of the first principled opponents of Israeli apartheid and U.S. aid to Israel. She tried to get George Bush impeached. She filed articles of impeachment against George Bush. And she was basically driven out of the Democratic Party and wound up running as the as the Green Party's presidential candidate in 2008. So, back to what Jordan claims about those of us on the left celebrating Turner's loss or being phony leftists or some shit like that. Tweeters. Well, first of all, I've been a socialist since the 1980s. I've been an activist throughout that time. I reject the idea, have for a long time, that getting people elected to Congress within the Democratic Party is going to get us very much. As with a lot of other leftists who aren't so impressed with Nina Turner or the Squad or Bernie Sanders or Pramila Jayapal and so forth, people like Danny Haiphong and Max Blumenthal and Nick, Socialist MMA, and many others who share this critique of the Democratic Party. We understand a lot about history and understand, how change happens and how it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, it never has happened, through electing good Democrats, so to speak. That doesn't mean we're happy when more left-leaning Democrats, like Nina Turner, lose. It just means that we understand that their winning won't by itself change much. What does change things is grassroots movements. Movements that that organize strikes and protests and boycotts. Sometimes third-party political candidates can be helpful, but direct action of all kinds. The New Deal didn't happen because Roosevelt was elected president in 1932. It happened because people were raising hell in the streets. And Roosevelt saw what was happening, and he was a wise enough capitalist, supporter of the capitalist class, to recognize that things were getting out of hand and he needed to do something before we had a revolution on our hands. So, he enacted the New Deal to try and diffuse some of that, rebellion. You can look at many other historical examples. Abolition of slavery. It didn't happen just because Lincoln was elected president, although obviously Lincoln was the one who legally freed the slaves, just as Roosevelt was the one who birthed the New Deal. Abolition of slavery was a culmination of a decades-long, very militant, at times violent, obviously the Civil War, but even before that, but always disruptive struggle for freedom by black people and their allies. So change happens, as you can see an example after example from U.S. history and the history of other countries, such as, for example, the implementation of universal health care in Canada or the UK or other places. It happens as a result of pressure from the bottom up, of struggles by grassroots movements. It's not just electing the right people into political office. Although obviously it's a little harder to effect change if people who are stridently opposed to what you want are in power. But just electing people isn't what brings about change. Now, Sanders and the Squad and Nina Turner and so forth are nothing new to me as far as purported efforts to reform the Democratic Party go. I was around back when Jesse Jackson campaigned for president in the 1980s. And it was very similar in a lot of ways to Sanders' campaigns in 2016 and 2020, except actually Jesse Jackson was well to the left of Bernie Sanders on foreign policy, particularly in his 1984 run. Despite that, though, even though it was supposedly the age of conservatism in the U.S., well, not despite that, I'm not sure why I said that. Even though Ronald Reagan was president, it was supposedly a time in the 1980s when people were more conservative, and to some extent they were, than in the 70s or 60s. There were a lot of folks, many young liberals and leftists, who were wildly enthusiastic about Jesse Jackson's campaign. And I was somewhat enthusiastic about it too. I was young, in my 20s, and was not as far to the left politically as I am today, although pretty far. But ultimately, I saw Jesse Jackson's political limitations. In the end, he wasn't the left-wing firebrand that he seemed to be. Particularly in his 1988 campaign, he presented much more mainstream policies than he had in the past. And in the end, basically, as some people have put it, he proved to be a sheepdog for the Democratic Party. He was funneling people into the Democratic Party, which, as I've talked about on the show many times before, really it's the graveyard for social movements. People in 2004, backing John Kerry's run for president against George Bush, even though John Kerry was, a ardent supporter of the Iraq War. So many anti-war activists getting behind John Kerry, effectively killed the anti-war movement, you could argue. And, although this isn't the principal focus of this episode, I think you could say that although it had its strengths in terms of, for example, putting Medicare for all on the national agenda, Bernie Sanders' campaigns for president as well have kind of sapped some of the energy from independent political activity. So, let me just briefly summarize what I've talked about in more depth before. You know, the political limitations of Bernie Sanders and AOC and some of the others, and then compare Nina Turner to them, and make the case that there's a lot of similarities in terms of those limitations. Bernie Sanders, he has a very progressive reputation, but really, if you take a close look, his record on foreign policy is at best a very mixed bag, and in some respects, it's absolutely terrible. Let's see, where was I trying to go here? Oh, okay. So just I wanted to read you an excerpt from an article I wrote about Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard, kind of comparing their political record and views. There are certainly some positive things you could say about Bernie Sanders' record in terms of foreign policy. He voted against the Iraq War. He's been an outspoken opponent of the war in Yemen, etc. But at other time, and back in the 1980s, I should add, before he came into Congress, he was a very strong opponent of U.S. efforts to overthrow the government of Nicaragua, the Sandinista government. He actually traveled to Nicaragua in solidarity with the Nicaraguan people, trying to stop the U.S. from overthrowing their fairly elected and at the time quite popular government. But at other times, Bernie sounds like an imperialist Cold War warrior. He's expressed support for the U.S. policy of arming so-called moderate rebels, who overwhelmingly are Islamic fundamentalist terrorists, attempting to overthrow the Syrian government of Bashar Assad. Bernie Sanders has openly stated, he supports overthrowing, the government of Syria. And we could, certainly critique the Syrian government, but whatever you think of the Syrian government, it's not as bad as what would happen if the U.S. were successful in its plans and these Muslim fundamentalist extremists came to power. We have seen what they've done in Saudi Arabia, in the parts of Syria and Iraq that they have controlled, and Libya. It's not good. Bernie Sanders claims that Hillary Clinton lost the 2016 election partially because of quote-unquote Russian interference, and he's just been a big-time Russiagator. He's accused Donald Trump of being in league with Putin and Russia. In a campaign fundraising email, he spouted McCarthy, or his campaign spouted McCarthyist rhetoric about Venezuela, referring to deceased Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, the most popular political leader in Venezuelan history, as a dead communist dictator. He had just recently died of cancer. And even though he expressed opposition to the Trump administration's efforts to overthrow the Venezuelan government, he repeated all the same talking points, all the same lies about the Venezuelan government that Trump and Pompeo and so forth were saying. Sanders even said in a written response to questions from the New York Times that he would consider a preemptive military strike against North Korea or Iran to prevent them from conducting a nuclear missile test. And he's been very opposed to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement in opposition to Israeli apartheid, accusing that movement of being in part motivated by anti-Semitism. And his record reflects these kind of sentiments. Even though he opposed the wars in Iraq and opposes the current war in Yemen, as I said, he's either abstained or voted against the military budget of the U.S. that several times the budget of any other country. He's done that, but he's also voted in favor of the vast majority of U.S. military interventions during his time in Congress. He voted for several of Barack Obama's military budgets and a couple of George Bush's. And even though he voted against the Iraq War, in the 90s he voted for the sanctions against Iraq that killed hundreds of thousands of people, famously described by former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State under Clinton during the 1990s, as being worth it, the price, even though 500,000 children in Iraq died as a result of those sanctions. And Bernie Sanders supported that policy that killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, men, women, and children. He also supported the bombings of Iraq that took place in the 1990s and voted in favor of and publicly supported a resolution calling for the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, even though he later voted against the Iraq War. In the 90s, he was all for overthrowing Saddam Hussein. He also supported the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999. He supported the authorization for use of military force in 2001, supporting the war in Afghanistan. As I mentioned, he supported this decade-long intervention in Syria by the U.S., trying to overthrow the Syrian government. He hasn't said a word about the brutal sanctions and the military occupation of northeastern Syria by the United States that's devastating the Syrian economy. They can't access their own oil or wheat grown in or produced in that region. And the U.S. is literally stealing Syria's oil. And Bernie Sanders is saying nothing whatsoever about that. And he also routinely supports military aid to Israel and even Saudi Arabia. In terms of other policies, Sanders won't even mention any of the women who accused Joe Biden of sexual harassment or assault. When he was finally asked by a reporter about Tara Reade's allegation that Joe Biden raped her in 1993 when she was an aide to Senator Biden, he basically said, "Well, I don't really know anything about it," even though it had been almost a month since she had come out publicly with her allegations. He said, "Well, she has a right to make her case and tell her story, but I don't know whether I believe her or not." Essentially is what he said. Sanders won't even mention Julian Assange, won't defend him or advocate for his freedom from Belmarsh prison, where he's been being held on as a result of espionage charges by the U.S. that Britain is kind of going along with. Sanders, even though he made Medicare for All a centerpiece of both of his presidential campaigns and has been a vocal advocate of single-payer healthcare ever since he came into Congress in the early 1990s, he's hardly talked about Medicare for All at any point this year. He was totally silent about the nationwide marches for Medicare for All in 55 cities that took place a few weeks ago. Bernie had nothing to say about that. He's only mentioned Medicare for All, I believe, once or twice on Twitter this whole year. And, in some ways, he you talks the talk. Have a look at the what he said during his campaign in 2016. Um, as I wrote about here, he during that campaign hammered home the message that achieving social progress is not a matter of getting the right politicians elected. Same thing I'm saying. As he put it in that campaign appearance, this is not about Bernie Sanders. You can have the best president in the history of the world, but that person will not be able to address the problems that we face unless there is a mass movement, a political revolution in this country. Right now, the only pieces of legislation that get to the floor of the House and Senate are sanctioned by big money, Wall Street, the pharmaceutical companies. The only way we win and transform America is when millions of people stand up, as you're doing today, and say, enough is enough. But, what has Bernie Sanders actually done to, help build, such a mass movement? He was nowhere to be found when, people were organizing the very first nationwide marches for Medicare for All. He didn't say anything when they were, a lot of those same organizers were trying to bring about, what in that quote he said needed to happen, that popular bills like Medicare for All, you needed to be brought to a vote on the House floor or the Senate floor. What is he doing to push for that to happen? That forced the vote movement back in the early part of this year, December of last year, was trying to get progressive members of the House to force a vote on the Medicare for All bill by making their vote for Nancy Pelosi's reelection as Speaker of the House contingent on her bringing that bill to a vote on the floor of the House, which would have sparked debate on the House floor and perhaps national discussion of Medicare for All and the need for it. In the middle of a pandemic. So why are all these people not pushing Medicare for All in the middle of a pandemic? We see one after another member of Congress, Bernie Sanders, AOC, Pramila Jayapal, the author of the Medicare for All bill, talking an awful lot about access to health care, about lowering the eligibility age for Medicare to age 60, about expanding the programs that Medicare covers, but relatively little about Medicare for All. So some exceptions. Jayapal, the author of the Medicare for All bill, has talked about Medicare, continued to talk about Medicare for All a fair bit, as has Nina Turner during her campaign. Bernie Sanders hasn't, even though it was a centerpiece of his campaign. He's barely mentioned Medicare for All this year. AOC has tweeted about it once, I believe, the entire year when she was talking about it regularly during her first run for Congress in 2018. And for the first year that she was in Congress, she talked about it a fair bit. Not so anymore. AOC, when she came into Congress, and at times thereafter, has talked about how important it is to being willing for a member of Congress who wanted progressive social change to be willing to fight, being willing to stick their neck out and risk their political career for the sake of pushing progressive policies like Medicare for All. Let's have a look at what she said. I think this was during her run for election in 2018. Okay, let's have a look.
To move. Don't people realize that the most powerful position you can be in is when you are not materially attached to a position of power? If you're a one-term Congress member, so what? You can make 10 years worth of change in one term if you're not afraid.
People are saying,
So she's saying, I'm willing to be a one-term congresswoman, if that's what it takes to push for change. If you're gonna fight for change as a politician, you don't have to be. You have to not be afraid to take risks. You risk your political career, for the sake of really pushing issues, really pushing legislation. Doing what you can to force a vote on important social reforms, such as Medicare for all, such as substantially raising the minimum wage, such as cutting student loan debt. You have to be willing to take risks. She was saying that in 2018, but what has she done as a member of Congress? In fact, like most of her Justice Democrat colleagues, such as Pramila Jayapal, who said she gave Joe Biden an A for his performance so far as president, AOC has been relatively uncritical of Joe Biden, basically saying she was surprised at how good a job he's doing. And even you can look at comparison between what Joe Biden promised during his campaign, which wasn't really all that much, and what he's done, and see that he's already, within just 8 months as president, or 7 months as president, broken on pretty much every single one of the promises that he made. Yet AOC is relatively uncritical of Joe Biden, even when he does the same things, such as bombing Syria, that she criticized Donald Trump for. She has little to say about foreign policy. She repeats establishment talking points on Venezuela. She voted for the CARES Act that was, as did Bernie Sanders, that was, a giveaway to big corporations, wealthy special interests, much more than it helped ordinary people cope with the effects of the COVID pandemic, as it was supposedly intended to. She says she didn't vote for it, but it was a voice vote, and her voice didn't say no. So, there's pretty good reason to think that she voted for it. Like every other member of the Progressive Caucus in Congress, she voted for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House, the second time she's voted for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, without any strings attached, no demands on Pelosi to, for example, as Pelosi has the power to do as Speaker of the House, bring crucial legislation like the Medicare for All bill to the floor of the House. There was no demand for that from the squad or Jayapal or anybody. In fact, no member of Congress even responded to invitations to attend a town hall organized by Medicare for All advocates who were pushing for the forced to vote strategy. Tens of thousands of people listened to that town hall, watched it on YouTube and other places. All of these advocates of Medicare for All are endorsers of the Medicare for All bill in Congress, were contacted, many of them invited to speak at the Forced to Vote town hall. So was Nina Turner. And none of them even had the courtesy of responding to that invitation. Just dead silence from them and their offices. Same thing happened with the marches for Medicare for All. that took place in July. Um, you know, Nina Turner, as well as numerous members of Congress, such as AOC, such as Cori Bush, and Jayapal, and so forth, were invited to speak at marches for Medicare for All, months in advance. None of them even extended the courtesy of responding by even politely declining the invitation to speak. They just gave the cold shoulder to a grassroots movement for universal health care, despite their purported support for that very thing. And here's something interesting I saw today. Where is it? AOC is now going to have a show, or there's going to be a show about her on CNN. So, as Nick, socialist MMA, socialist mixed martial artist, said on in a tweet about it, do y'all really think shit libs in the corporate media establishment, CNN and so forth, would be propping AOC up like this if she was a threat to their power? I mean, come on. That wouldn't be happening if AOC hadn't, to a significant degree, blended into the establishment that she campaigned for Congress on the first time, claiming to be an opponent of. Okay, so, what about Nina Turner herself? Well, I took a look at her campaign page, the issues page of her campaign. Do you see anything about foreign policy on there? Even if we expand the bullet points, is there anything about foreign policy on there? None of these topics are about foreign policy. She literally says nothing whatsoever about any foreign policy issue on her website. She also has no comment on any foreign policy issue at any time within the last couple of years. I looked all the way back to January 2019 with a Twitter search. She hasn't said anything about Syria or Israel or Venezuela or anywhere in the world where the U.S. is intervening. Nothing on foreign policy on her website whatsoever. And even if you try to dig down into details on the issues page on our website, it's minimal. Those bullet points that I briefly showed you are all that's there. So, her campaign website is dog shit. It's terrible. She has nothing about foreign policy. She's never publicly commented about Julian Assange's persecution by the U.S. government, or as far as I've been able to find out about Edward Snowden or any other truth tellers being persecuted by the U.S. government for exposing corruption and warmongering and so forth by governments and corporations and so forth. She's been completely silent about the allegations of sexual harassment and assault against Joe Biden. There's been little direct critique from her of the Democratic Party establishment, of Biden or Pelosi. And as Jordan Chariton himself admitted, you know, she didn't even talk much about her opponent's corruption until quite late in the race after the attacks on her, these dishonest attacks that said she didn't support a $15 minimum wage and didn't actually support Medicare for all, which, I mean, as I've said, she hasn't pushed very, she has turned her back on grassroots activists for Medicare for all, but, certainly if it came up for a vote, she would almost certainly vote for it. The issue is she's not really going to push for it or collaborate with and use her enormous platform to highlight the efforts of grassroots activists for Medicare for all or other policies. But in any case, getting back to my point, it is true she waited until fairly late in the race to respond to her opponent's attacks and highlight the corruption and fealty to the Democratic corporate establishment until late in the race. She's also made some questionable decisions in terms of hiring of campaign staff, making Jeff Weaver very much an establishment Democrat, her chief campaign advisor. And she had no criticism of the squad or Bernie Sanders for any decision they've ever made. She's made no response, as I mentioned, to invitations from Force the Vote activists or March for Medicare for All activists, or to demonstrations on Julian Assange. One of my Twitter friends, Misty from Columbus, Ohio, was a lead organizer there of demonstrations for Assange, participated in organizing for March for Medicare for All, which took place there in Columbus. She and others invited Nina to speak at the march in Columbus, no response, even though they asked her months in advance, and instead of supporting the march in Columbus or perhaps organizing one of her own there in Cleveland, she just scheduled a routine campaign event on the same day as the Medicare for All marches. Didn't mention them either at that event or on Twitter or anything. So just like Sanders and AOC, she's failed to use her platform to help build mass movements, and she's largely turned her back on grassroots activists. Let's see, what was I gonna... Oh, all right, sorry. So here's what Jen Dice, who along with Jordan Chariton is a co-founder of Status Quo, had to say about Nina's failure to either show up for or promote or anything the marches for Medicare for All. Jen said, when you're being hammered by attack ads in a deep Biden/establishment district, you don't attach yourself to a shit show. She didn't make clear what she was referring to by a shit show, but everybody who responded to her, quite including me, quite naturally interpreted it as saying that the marches for Medicare for All were basically a shit show. It's not. And she does say here, I emphasize that I covered, enjoyed, found to be substantive the D.C. March for Medicare for All. So, what exactly is she referring to as a shit show? Later in this thread, Jordan Chariton claimed, Jen never did elaborate, but Jordan claims that she was referring to the supposed fact that the March for Medicare organizers March for Medicare for All organizers invited a neo-Nazi to speak at one of the marches. Well, that's just false. What happened was that there was a fake announcement of a keynote speaker at one of the marches for Medicare for All. In Muncie, Indiana, which never actually had a march for Medicare for All, but someone named Matt H. Bach was described as a keynote speaker at a march for Medicare for All in Muncie, Indiana, and the picture that went with the announcement was of a neo-Nazi named Matt Heimbach from Indiana. This was all fake. There were no real organizers for March for Medicare for All from Muncie, Indiana, who tried to organize an actual march. So what happened was that somebody involved in putting announcements and other stuff on the website for the National March for Medicare for All organization, you took this alleged ad at face value and you put the announcement on the website, not knowing who Matt H. Bach was, or Matt Heimbach. Even if they had known who Matt Heimbach was, they might not have put two and two together and recognized this falsification. And then, within hours after that, it was discovered what had happened, and the announcement was taken down. But they've been constantly smeared, no doubt by associates of whoever put this fake ad up as being supportive of having Nazi speakers at their events, and you don't smear a march or even a part of a march or drama surrounding a march instigated by political opponents of Medicare for All. That's not an excuse for not supporting the very first national marches for Medicare for All. It's just a terrible excuse. And Jen is making this excuse for Nina Turner, and there's no excuse for it. Somebody going by the handle @PlayerInTheGame said, after speaking for Jen and Jordan about the Medicare for All rallies, I'll say this: politicians such as Nina Turner, afraid of being associated with us plebes in case we say or do something dumb, such as not realizing that this was a fake event announcement, or that the person being announced was associated with a Nazi group. That's not exactly dumb. That's just an understandable mistake. Politicians afraid of being associated with us plebes in case we say or do something dumb and it hurts them is ironic in a world where politicians can sweep literal crimes under the carpet and move on. Crimes such as Joe Biden sexually assaulting someone, or similarly for Andrew Cuomo, who's still governor of New York, despite this having come out about him that he sexually harassed tons of women several months ago. He might finally be kicked out of office, but he's gotten away with that, as well as being responsible for thousands of nursing home deaths due to COVID. So far, he's gotten away with that. They go on to say, you cannot ask for our support, our money, and our time, but then to be afraid to show up for us when people organize on a massive scale around an issue that these politicians use to get elected, or try to get elected. We're not here to be used. To say that the rallies for Medicare for All were imperfect is to say that they were organized and attended by human beings. Any leftist activity is criticized. We can choose to nitpick, or we can choose to focus on the end goal and say, screw you to the haters. But we are not here to be used. So that's her response to Jen Dye's saying that the marches for Medicare for All were a shit show, which I personally found very offensive. So just like Bernie Sanders and AOC, Nina Turner has failed to use her platform to help build mass movements. She's largely turned her back on grassroots activists, and she has been very muted in her criticisms of the Democratic Party establishment in recent months, let alone her colleagues in the Justice Democrats. So, in sum, Turner followed her top advisor Jeff Weaver's bad advice in a number of ways in this campaign, as I've referred to. It didn't help her win. A good case can be made that she'd have had a far better chance of winning if she had connected with grassroots activists, if she'd been more outspoken about all the stuff I mentioned that she's been silent about, Julian Assange and foreign policy writ large, and many other things. And of course, if she had a better ground game in terms of activists going door to door to canvas for her campaign, as AOC did in 2018. Now, of course, there are no guarantees that she could have won if she had pursued a more effective strategy. But winning isn't everything anyway. Getting elected is, those of us to the left of the Democratic Party, try to make this point over and over again. Getting elected is not the be-all and end-all of participation in electoral politics for those of us on the left. When I ran for Congress as a Green Party candidate in 2002, I certainly did not expect, even in my wildest dreams, that I would get elected. I got a little over 2%, I think, if memory serves. But that's not why I was running. Political elections represent an opportunity to have a public platform to articulate issues and concerns and policies that you're passionate about, and make the case for them and raise their profile. So, no matter what it would have done to her chances of winning, it would have been much better for Nina Turner to run a principled and outspoken campaign than what she did. Because what she did lost anyway. So what would it have hurt? It would have hurt anything, obviously, for her to take a bolder, more principled approach and not avoid talking about issues because she thinks it could get her in trouble. I mean, she literally, had nothing whatsoever to say the whole month of May, while, even the mainstream media was talking about and allowing expressions of horror to be made about the actions of Israel in ethnic cleansing in East Jerusalem and bombing of Gaza that killed over 200 people, and ongoing brutality and dehumanization of the Palestinian people. Where the fuck is Nina Turner? Why can't she talk about that if she's so goddamn progressive? Because what happened is she not only lost, but she kind of went out with a whimper, and she may come back and run again next year, because this is a special election for a seat that was vacated by someone who took an appointment in Joe Biden's administration. So that seat is up for re-election again next year. Maybe she'll get it together and do better next time. But, we'll see. So, just in closing, I just want to summarize my thoughts on the role of electoral politics in social change. In general, the powerful elites in this country and elsewhere in the world, which, let's be honest, whether it's Mitch McConnell or Bernie Sanders or AOC that we're talking about, members of Congress are a powerful elite in this country. They have their own interests and their careers and so forth, which are not our interests. We can write all the letters to the editor or to our congressperson that we want. We can vote all we want for politicians who don't support the things we want, or who only support a pale imitation of what we want. Like lowering the age for Medicare to 60 or something, or minor raises in the minimum wage, or people who merely give lip service to the politicians who do so, but won't fight for them, as these progressive members of Congress, these Justice Democrats, have repeatedly done. Talk a good game, but not being willing to fight, even to the extent that some of their Democratic colleagues on the right wing of the Democratic Party, such as Joe Manchin, have been willing to do. Manchin has repeatedly refused to vote for bills, popular bills, unless things that he wanted were included. When the hell do Bernie Sanders or AOC or these other progressives do that? They don't use their power. And either they don't want to, because they're more concerned about their careers than affecting change, or they don't understand a basic principle that slavery abolitionist Frederick Douglass talked about in the 1800s. Power concedes nothing without a demand, he said. It never did, and it never will. We can't channel demands for social change through voting for candidates in corrupt political parties. The Democratic Party, as Jill Stein said, is a counter-revolutionary party. We can't make a revolution in a counter-revolutionary party. So when we channel demands through voting for candidates in corrupt political parties, like the Democratic and Republican parties both are, that makes them requests, not demands. It's in other venues, in the workplace and in the streets, and to an extent, an organized no vote to the establishment candidates of the two corporate parties, such as Joe Biden, such as Bill Clinton, such as Pelosi, etc. That's where the true potential for exercising power lies. As historian Howard Zinn put it, it's not who's sitting in the White House that matters, but who is sitting in. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. And please let me know what you think. I will see you next time.